Hello, hello. We are live. Welcome to Winging It. Winging It is a show by Oddbird about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, Tab Atkins-Bittner will talk to Miriam, Suzanne, and I about what to do when anchor positioning isn't working. Let's start with introductions and say a bit about your experience with anchor positioning. I'm James Stuckey-Weber, a developer at Oddbird, and I've been digging into CSS anchor positioning to implement a polyfill for anchor positioning. Miriam, can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Miriam. I'm one of the founders at Oddbird and on the CSS working group. And I've basically only interacted with anchor positioning through the working group issues and our live streams when you show me demos, and a little bit of playing around with those things. Haven't used it a whole lot. Tab?
I'm Tab Atkins-Bittner. I work at Google. I'm a member of the CSS working group, one of the main editors of a bunch of the specs. In particular, I'm the main editor of anchor positioning. So theoretically, I know a lot about the spec. We will see in practice how much I can always keep in my head if I haven't actively been doing editing in the last few months.
Totally.
Great. Thanks all. I think we have a lot of demos and things like that. If you'd like to work alongside of us, our code pens are in a collection in the I shared a link in the YouTube, and it is this link here if you want to go quickly and type that. They can also be found with more discussion on an article on oddbird.net called Here's Why Your Anchor Positioning Isn't Working. So also feel free to ask questions in the comments section. So I think we'll dive in and just take a look at one case where anchor positioning is working or not working, as the case may be. One of the very common things that I've seen as I've helped people troubleshoot anchor positioning is, there we go, is they will want to put the positioned element inside of the anchor element. So they will want to here, what they might want to do is have the anchor element. This might be their tooltip button or something like that, or a list item. And then inside of that, they'd put a positioned element. And as...
Do you want to just quick step back and just say what the anchor positioning is doing?
Sure. So what we're wanting to do here is we're wanting to place anchor, or we're wanting to place this this pink box close to the anchor in some way in relationship to the anchor. We know we have this anchor element, which can be any element really, and we want to place something close to it. It's really all about that relationship between two elements. And in a lot of cases, we can do this with some combination of relative or absolute positioning and doing some inset manipulation and things like that. But though there might not always be a direct connection between these elements. And so anchor positioning kind of lets you grab, or I don't know, have a little portal across the DOM to things that are not as connected as you might think, in other words.
So instead of just trying to like position it close to a thing, you say it's actually related to this thing, anchor it to that, hang off of it in some way.
Yeah. So where we can see it working in this left example, we have this anchor and then this pink box. And what we can do, we can use position area, and we can just say, given, well, I'll back up and say the anchor has the anchor name A, and the positioned element here has, we're saying anchor that to anchor A here, and then we're saying position that in the top right. And so here we're just putting it to the top right of the anchor. And position area is a very powerful way of doing that. You can also do this with more verbosely by saying this would be similar to bottom, anchor, top, and I think this is right, left, anchor, right. If you wanted to do that. And that that is approximately the same thing here. So that is setting the inset of that element there. And so then what we can see actually, if we look into the DOM, I'll make this bigger too. On our position element here, we actually say we are able to see the position anchor is A, and it helps us by saying, yep, this is where it is. On the other hand, if we're looking at this other anchor here, it is not where we want it to be. And here we can see A is not defined, and very tiny type for you, that part. The tooltip does not show up, or does not get larger.
And it's the same classes, so it's the same styles being applied. It's just a difference of child versus sibling.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, fun fact, I'm almost certain this is just a spec bug, actually.
Ooh.
Because you can make this work exactly the way you want it to. Still have the child be, the position element be a child of the anchor. If instead of anchoring it to its ancestor, you make another sibling of the position element, make it abs pose inset 0, so it fills the anchor entirely, and then anchor to that. It's the exact same size as the parent, and that works. So this is actually just a spec bug in exactly the valid anchor determination algorithm that I have not fixed yet.
Okay, that's fascinating. Yeah, I would not have guessed that. I mean, I think what the reason that I was thinking that this was not possible is because with this specific format, the containing block for the child is this anchor, and so it needs, but it according to the spec at least, it needs to be an ancestor or the same one. It can't be a child, or the containing block can't be that.
That is what the spec says, and that's wrong, because like I said, if you just take the example right there, make another child, make it a div class equals anchor. Not perfect. Make it another div class equals anchor and give it a style of position absolute inset 0.
Okay.
Oh, and it'll have to go before the child. Sorry.
Okay. And
can we rename this live stream to why your anchor positioning spec
doesn't work? Yeah. But yeah, so you see, now it works correctly. This is because the preceding sibling, abs pose, is a valid anchor, but it's able to take the exact size of the containing block. So the containing block not being a valid anchor is clearly a spec bug. There's nothing theoretically making it wrong. It's basically just an off by one error in terms of what elements are allowed as you walk the tree.
Okay.
So I'll go file an issue for myself to make sure I get that fixed.
Wonderful. Yeah. The other way, and when I was showing this to Miriam yesterday, I'll just reset this. The other thing to note is that you might not need anchor positioning in this because you already have access to the anchor. You're a child of that anyways. And so this will ruin.
Yeah, you're sort of absolute positioning already anchors to the parent if it's positioned. Yeah.
If, for instance, if you do bottom 100% and left 100%, you can get that child in the same place. So you're not.
Is there a difference there, Tab? Is there a difference in what's going on?
There are some differences. For simple cases, this works just fine. As noted, if you want to put it in the top right, you just set your left edge to all the way over, your bottom edge to all the way up. But that means you don't have access to any more powerful anchor positioning. You can't combine it with a second anchor or any of the other stuff that you can do. So as long as you're just wanting simple cases, yeah, child-parent relationship doesn't necessarily need it, but that'll fail as soon as you want to go beyond that.
Got it.
So, I mean, for example, say instead of doing in the upper right, you want it to be nestled into the upper right of the anchor. That's not possible to express using plain old abs pause. It's trivial with anchor positioning.
So we got a little bit into this in the in this we talked about containing blocks, and I have to say this is my favorite spec quote that I found is notably a containing block is not a box, it is a rectangle, which continues to break my brain a little bit. Is there, I guess, what is a containing block? How? Yeah. Well, I think we'll get into more in depth later, but for what should people know about containing blocks at this point?
So just a quick intro to some of the terminology used there. Box is a term of art in CSS. It means roughly the same thing as an element, but it's in the tree that we make out of the element tree. We take the DOM, we apply some formatting, the display property and some other stuff, and that produces boxes. Most elements produce one box, some elements produce more, or none if they're display none or something like that. So we get another tree that's like formatting based instead of just DOM based. And that's what we mean when we say the containing block is not a box. It's not one of the things in there. That said, the spec has a big shorthand that we use all the time where we go ahead and refer to properties of the containing block as if it was a box, because boxes can have properties. And that's because otherwise we got to constantly say the rigmarole, if the width of the element generating the containing block, blah, blah, blah. And it's just too much. It's sufficiently clear what element is generating a containing block and what properties it should get from that. So what is a containing block? Like I said, it's a rectangle. It is just a region of space somewhere in the document generated by a box. So it's usually the dimensions of some box, the width and height and the position. But it can be shifted around. There's various things that adjust that. And then we have several levels of adjustment we make to the containing block. The big one is going to be the inset modified containing block, which is what you get when you start from the containing block and apply your insets. A few other things can adjust it too. Grid layout can adjust the containing block from being the entire grid element to being a particular grid area. And then, of course, position area lets you adjust the containing block to a particular region around the anchor. And then you apply insets from that to shrink or grow from there. So there's a rectangle somewhere on the page that just dictates some coordinates for you. Someone had a quick question in chat about if before and after also works. Yeah, I think there's some demos about that later in the show. Yes, a number of the real-ish pseudo elements, the ones that act like elements, such as before and after, are perfectly valid as anchors. They have positions on the page. They're well defined. As long as they can be laid out as a rectangle somewhere, you can anchor pause to it. There you go.
Yep. Yeah. So here are the the specific language around that is a fully stylable tree abiding pseudo element. Miriam called me out on pulling spec quotes out of context, and it's fun. But so really the three that I'm aware of, I guess, are before, after, and then the file download or file upload input button. There's also, and here in this example, these arrows below are anchored to the before content, after content, and that button. There's also the web, the slider, input slider,
the range input,
which range. Is the input range slider thumb, which is not fully it's not fully in the spec, and so it's unclear. It was unclear if that was. It works currently in Chrome, but will it?
Currently the browsers and the working group are gradually putting together an actual description of all the form control pseudo elements and what they mean, exactly how they work. And so most of those, if not all of them, should be fully stylable, tree-abiding pseudo-elements, and thus would be potential anchors. Similarly, the carousel-related work that's going on in the Overflow 5 spec, the scroll markers and scroll marker groups, those should be valid anchors as well, because they're tree-abiding and fully stylable. They're just act like ordinary elements living somewhere in the tree.
Great. That is definitely helpful.
Yeah.
So that means
a counterexample.
Oh,
Just a counterexample real quick. Things that aren't that. Whoa.
Sorry.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, cool. Counterexample is things like the highlight pseudo elements or the spelling error pseudo element, first letter, first line. Those are not tree abiding. They cross element boundaries in weird ways. That means they cannot be a single continuous element. They have to be broken up in some way. And CSS purposely does not define exactly how it's broken up. So you don't know how many elements there are, exactly where they are. And they're very limited in their styling for that too. So it doesn't reveal exactly where the elements are, how many there are. So those things can't be anchored to. You cannot anchor to a first line, but you can anchor to a before, because that's just a normal ass box.
yeah. Marker is sort of tree abiding, but not stylable. Would that, or would marker be in there? Probably not.
I think right now it fails the check. I continue to think that marker should be more fully stylable, and so it probably should be a valid anchor. Yeah, but it's probably not a valid anchor right now per spec.
Great. I think then this next one is, we kind of touched on it earlier in one of the earlier demos, but another thing that is important is the order things appear in the DOM. So here, what we have is this on the left is absolute. The anchor itself is absolute positioned, and this one is relative. And this before is before the absolute anchor in the DOM. The after is after in the DOM. And on the relative, it's before and after in the same way. And what we're seeing here is on relative, both of them are able to find the anchor, but on the absolute, we can't find the anchor on the before positioned element. And these all have the same positioned element classes. So why? What's going on there?
So this is an unfortunate bit about anchor positioning, is that it is fundamentally a bit of a layer violation. It's doing styles and positioning based on other elements positioning in a way that violates the normal just parent-child relationship. Parents can lay out their children. Children can know some information about their parents, but normally no other information crosses the DOM during layout. Anchor pos can do basically whatever it wants. And so to make that feasible, to prevent any layout cycles or any weird stuff, there's a significant number of restrictions about what things the anchor is allowed to see. It boils down to just anything that is already fully laid out and positioned at the time that you encounter the positioned element is up for grabs. Anything that will be laid out afterwards is not. And the precise rules for how positioned elements work are that any absolute positioned elements are laid out after all the non-positioned elements in the containing block. That means, for example, that both the before and after abs poses here can see the relative position, because it's not an absolutely positioned element. It's just laid out during normal flow. And so it's already considered laid out by the time we get to dealing with the abs pose elements. So both of them can see it totally fine. But if the anchor is also abs pose, then it goes in the list of things done at the end, and we process those in order. So here, the before abs pose does not yet see the anchor as laid out, so it can't position relative to it. But the after does see the anchor already laid out because it came before it, so it can lay out relative to it. It's unfortunate that so many of the previously arcane details of the layout algorithm have to be exposed this way to authors, but there's really no other way around it if we wanted anchor pos to work in any reasonable way. The big trick is just, if you're going to be positioning relative to siblings, ideally put your abs pose after your anchors, because then it's much more likely that they'll be able to see the anchor regardless of what other shenanigans the anchor is getting up to.
Okay.
I feel like it's more and more common that we're revealing the internals of CSS with powerful new tools. Even
Yeah.
custom properties sort of reveal the internals of value resolution in a way that sometimes surprises people.
Quite a bit. Yep.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful to understand why that's working like that. And yeah, I think a little bit later I think we should talk a little bit about how to better expose those to developers and how to make these things less surprising or unknown. The next demos I have are related to top layer, which is with popovers and dialogues. And one of the easy things that's nice, and this is one of the primary use cases, we have an anchor in here, and then we have a popover and a dialogue that I'm just opening up by default on this demo. And as you can see, we're able to easily anchor the popover and dialogue to that anchor, or that outside, or the popover or the anchor, or sorry, the popover or the dialogue itself directly. There's no there's no problems there. The one thing there is that you have to anchor on things in a lower layer or your own layer. You can't anchor onto something in a higher layer, which in essence, that means you couldn't have your anchor inside of your dialog box and then something in the root layer being anchored onto or positioned based on that.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah, this is the same basic deal as before, where I said that abs poses can only see things that have already been laid out before them, and if something falls after it, it's invisible to it. Top layer is like the last list of things that happen. The whole page is laid out, and then the top layer things start getting laid out in order. So anything that's in the top layer can see the entire page, and anything in earlier layers of the top layer, but nothing that falls after because they haven't been laid out yet. So top layer stuff is usually very powerful. It can mostly ignore document positioning stuff because it's just put at the very end. But yeah, you have to be careful there with, if you open both a dialogue and a popover or two dialogues or something, the earlier one can not position relative to the later one, but the later one could position relative to the earlier one.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like for the most part, it seems like a very rare thing that people will run into that. Although I'm sure people will find ways to run into that for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be like as we get some of the more powerful popovers showing up, like popover hints, and they're a little bit more ephemeral. Those can definitely get opened up relative to things that are already in the top layer. You might have opened a dialogue, and then you have a hint popover opening up for a term in that dialogue box. But those are fine because the hint popover will be opened afterwards, unless it'll be in a later top layer and be able to position itself just fine. It should be a rare case that you actually are trying to anchor an earlier top layer thing to a later one, just because the thing you're trying to anchor to wasn't even in the page at the time.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense to me why it works this way. And then when you get into this is a little bit maybe more surprising, but maybe not surprising, but elements inside of a popover. So here we have an anchor again, and then we have a popover, and then which is up here, but then we have a popover or an element inside of that popover, and an element inside of the dialogue, and we can position those on that anchor, but only if they are fixed positioning. So if they're absolute, for instance, it will be somewhere within that popover itself and not able to find that anchor. So it does need to be fixed. And yeah, I was curious Yeah, why does it work like that?
Yep. So this is more of those exposing some slightly more arcane details of stuff. An anchor pause element can only see things up to its own containing block. Whatever thing is, whatever rel pause or abs pause or whatever ancestor it is that it is going to be generating its containing block, it can only see things inside of there. So in the case of popover and dialog, they are both positioned elements automatically. They're in the top layer, but the important thing is they are positioned. And so they form a containing block for any abspose children by default. So anchors in there that are just abspose will be trapped to only seeing things in the popover or in the dialog. A fixed pause can escape those things. It uses the viewport as its containing block, which is above all the elements in the page. There's still some slight details about exactly how you mix viewport stuff with top layer things sometimes, but it shouldn't be the sort of thing you run into really. It's just a bit of arcane spec business. But that means that if you have a fixed pause, it gets to hop out of whatever its containing blocks are and generally can see the entire page. Again, with ordering involved. Things earlier in the page that are also fixed pause are visible. Things later in the page that are also fixed pause are not visible because they haven't been laid out yet. But fixed pause will fix a lot of your problems. Like a big thing to do is if you have a problem with anchor pause, try making it position fixed. It'll probably solve your issue.
Right, because this isn't specific to top layer. This would happen anytime you're in another positioned element. You can't see outside of that positioned element unless you change to fixed position.
Exactly, yeah. There's a couple other things that will trigger it. Some things will still block you. For example, if one of your ancestors is transformed, that traps fixed pause elements. It turns them into abspose elements instead, position absolute elements, relative to that transformed element. There's a few other things that do that, like an opacity other than 1. Some of the just paint-related things will also trap a fixed pause, but it's not too many things. So most of the time, fixed pause will let you jump out.
Unfortunately, and this might be tricking to some people, the first implementation of container queries trapped things in that way. Changed a container would become a fixed position containing block. That's being fixed. I don't know how many browsers have rolled out that fix, but in the future, containers should work fine. But maybe there's still some browsers that would trap your absolute positioning in a container query container.
Yeah, if I recall, that's because the container queries apply style containment. I think that
layout. I think layout containment was the one that trapped things.
Yep. You're right.
And we've removed layout containment, but late.
Yes, that's right.
One question I have around this, and maybe this is a bit of a false equivalency or something like that, but when we're using position area, we're essentially creating a new containing block for popover positioned. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about how that works in a little bit, but so if we're escaping if we're creating a new containing block for this fixed position element, why can't we do that also for absolute position elements and let that escape and just create? I mean, because this or I guess what is it, or why can't we just make that new containing block?
Well, it's just because that's the definition of abspose versus fixed pause. Position absolute and position fixed are exactly identical in every way, except that position fixed will walk up the tree until it finds a fixed pause container, which is usually just going to be the viewport. Well, abspose stops at the first abspose container it finds. And that's just how they're defined, because usually you're going to want to position yourself relative to your nearest thing, and sometimes you want to be relative to the page. There's some proposal that will probably show up in Anchor Pause 2 or maybe in Position 4 spec to let you kind of relax the abs pose restriction on exactly what container you're using to let you walk further up the tree, to give you a behavior kind of between the current position absolute and position fixed. But that's not in the spec now, and there's still details to work through for it.
Okay. And I think part of what I'm thinking is the containing block for fixed is the entire viewport, and it's about the overlap of the containing blocks. It's not just a single element that is or a single element's containing block. It's not as simple as just moving something around within the containing block structure. You have to look at the relationship between between the positioned element and the anchor and their containing blocks and how those interact and overlap.
Yes. Yeah, I bet, because position area basically subdivides your containing block into a 3x3 grid centered on the anchor. Ideally, the anchor is inside of your containing block, and then you get a reasonable behavior. But if your anchor is outside, you get some degenerate stuff, because your entire containing block might just be one region of that 3x3 grid.
Okay.
But in this case, yeah, it works fine because the anchor is in the middle of the viewport. So the viewport gets subdivided and it does what you expect.
Yeah. Actually, this is probably a good place for, this is a demo that Tab I pulled from one of your talks. I think it's at this link. And yeah, if you want to talk us through this demo and how it shows containing block on this.
Yeah. So because it hasn't previously been super important exactly what your containing block was, and the bounds of your containing block were relatively trivial in the past, you could kind of just get by with not worrying about that concept. That's no longer true with anchor pos. You need to know where your containing block is, because that dictates how exactly you're going to behave. So this is a trick that I used in some talks, and it's useful just kind of in general to figure out what your containing block is to help you debug any positioning issues with anchor pos. All this is you take an element, make it a sibling of the positioned element that you want to find out information about, make it position absolute, inset 0, that means top 0, bottom 0, left 0, right 0, and then give it a useful background. Here it's a partially transparent repeating linear gradient, so that you can see what's going on without blocking everything out. So you can see in this case, you got the big stripy background across the entire page, because wherever the actual abs pose is, that's going to be your entire containing block right now. But if you were to use position area, it's commented out right there to say top right, then it's anchored to -- anchor 1, and it's shrinking its containing block to the top right region of that grid, and there you see the results. Only the top right is highlighted. If you change the anchor or change the position area, you'll see it move around as well, and that'll just tell you the area that you have to move around in if you actually are trying to do some positioning with anchor pos in there.
Yeah, and I think this is a helpful, I think, a helpful visualization to figure out how or where positioning or position area is working, and also because you can then move your position element around inside of this containing block. It's not just this is. I mean, this is if your inset is 0. If you have a smaller thing, I mean, in theory, you could center your position element within this containing block, or if that is what you need, or do other positioning within that containing block.
Yeah, because the alignment properties are set up to default to some useful behaviors with this. In this case, for example, your top span left. So if you put an element that is smaller than that region into there with that styling, it'll automatically align to the bottom and to the right. because that's probably what you want when you're lining up there. Although I think actually
it tries to align close to the element, to the anchor.
Yes.
It tries to, wherever you're going, it tries to stay close to the anchor.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you can change that by changing justify self and align self. Give yourself whatever alignment you want. Change your size so it fills the whole region or doesn't. It's all available to you, but it just sets up some useful defaults based on position area, which is one of the reasons why it's good to use position area instead of explicitly setting your top left, bottom right. It tends to work correctly for you.
Yeah. The one difference I've noticed between position area and using anchor functions is percentages for margins and things like that, because those are calculated based on the containing block. If you have a position area here, and you're saying like margin 5% or whatever, it's going to be 5% of this area versus with otherwise it's going to be a different value.
Right.
But that's
like 5% of the whole viewport or something.
Yes.
Yeah. If you weren't using position area, but were instead manually saying bottom anchor top, right anchor right, to get it in the same sort of position, its containing block would still be the entire page. So width percentage, margin percentage, etc., would all resolve relative to the entire page. Might be what you want, usually isn't what you want. So this helps a lot in that case too.
Yes. I think next week I'll have an article coming out about position area and about some of those differences. So check out oddbird.net next week for information on that as well.
Yep. The question in YouTube asking if it's okay to use the body element itself for the anchor container. Nothing wrong with that, except the bit in the opening of this section where there's currently a bug in the spec that doesn't allow you to use your actual containing block as your anchor container. But if you go back, there's a trick to make that still work. And it's perfectly fine if you want to fill the entire page or position yourself relative to the entire page using that is your containing block. Perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that.
There was also a question on Mastodon about using logical properties, logical insets, I think specifically, or it seems like inside of anchor, I think it might be specific to inside of the anchor function. You can say anchor left or anchor top. Is there a logical version of that? Anchor inline start?
Yes, the anchor functions also have logical keywords, start, end, self-start, and self-end. We don't need to specify inline or block because that's implicit from which inset property you're using them in. Start and end are going to be relative to the direction, the writing mode of your containing block. Self-start and self-end are relative to the writing mode of your positioned element. Usually those are going to be the exact same thing. It's rare that those will differ, but occasionally if you're mixing languages around, those might be different. And so we tend to expose both of those concepts. But you can use the logical inset properties. You can use the logical anchor side values. Go fully logical if that's better for your page, or go physical, whatever's easiest.
Great. The next example I have is on anchoring with shadow roots and shadow DOM. One of the rules is you have to define the anchor name in the same layer as you are using it in. So for here, for example, we have an anchor name that we're defining inside of a shadow root. It's on this anchor or this blue element, this top one here, and then we're trying to position on that from outside, and because they are in two different one's in light DOM, one's in shadow DOM. And this would also be the case if you had multiple shadow sheets. You wouldn't be able to talk across that. But what you can do, Tab, do you want to say more?
Oh, yeah. You feel free to continue on with the anchor tube bit.
Yeah. So then if you want to do that, you can just set a part inside your inside of your shadow element, and then this part would be you can select that from the outside. And here we're defining that anchor name outside, and we're using that or referring to the anchor name from the outside as well. And then
So it's the name that can't escape from style sheets that are in the shadow DOM. Those names won't be visible outside the shadow DOM.
Yeah.
Yes. This is an unfortunate consequence of the way that shadow DOM encapsulation works. Generally speaking, well, depends entirely on what your use cases are, how you're using shadow DOM. If you're trying to anchor to something inside of your shadow, both the anchor and the abspose are in your shadow, you probably don't want that name to escape. You don't want to accidentally override a name that the page is using, because you might have written just an independent component, no relation to the outer page that's using your component. You don't want to clash. And that's a general rule. Same reason like your IDs in your shadow aren't visible outside, because you have no way to predict whether or not they'll clash or not. But quite a lot of shadow DOM usage isn't wanting that level of encapsulation. They're all just being written by the same author, the outer page and the inner shadow, and you would like to be able to link things up. I have a issue, but let me post that into the YouTube comments real quick. Has failed to post. Okay, well, issue 10808, if Miriam wants to grab that, is about precisely breaking shadow DOM encapsulation for anchor positioning with an explicit opt-in. The last time this was discussed in the working group, we said, yes, this sounds reasonable. Tab, go figure out the details of it. I have not figured out the details of it yet. So it's still on me to do, to define an export mechanism so that a shadow DOM can say, these are the names that should be visible outside of me, that other stuff can anchor to. So currently, yeah, this demo shows the correct per-spec behavior right now, but it is anticipated in a future version that you will be able to have a positioned element anchor to things inside of a shadow, as long as the shadow is explicitly saying, yeah, this is cool, please anchor to me.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be really interesting when we can have more control over what we're exposing. I think that'll be pretty powerful. The next one or demo, this is kind of an inverse of the others. The others have been like, here's why things aren't working, or why you're not finding an anchor. And here this one is a way for you to control what anchors are being found. Anchor scope is incredibly useful. I think I've been trying to evangelize this to people who are picking it up. I think it's coming from we're moving anchor positioning from the world of JavaScript to the world of CSS, and there's this tendency in JavaScript. We had to give everything unique IDs, and we don't need to do that anymore. So a lot of the troubleshooting I've been helping out with, it's okay. We have to make a new ID for each of these things. So we can have a unique name, so we know which anchor to go on. I'm like, we don't need to do that. So anchor scope is beautiful, and basically what it does is, in this example, we have an anchor name A. Our position element has a position anchor A as well, and our scope, which is this orange bar here, we just say anchor scope A, and our anchor doesn't go out, our position element doesn't go outside of that scope, that DOM, to look for an anchor. So on this one over here,
multiple anchors with the same name.
Yes.
And each of the things we're positioning sees the one that's close to it, basically.
Yes.
Nice.
Yep. Yeah. Specifically, yeah, the scope prevents the specified names from leaving the scope. So things inside the scope can see those names. Things outside the scope can't see the names. That's why your outside scope one isn't anchored to anything because both of the anchors are inside of scopes that the outside scope pink box is not inside of. So it doesn't see any anchors at all.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the inside scope anchors to the first one because that's the only one it sees. It is inside the first box. And so it won't see the anchor in the second box, even if it would be otherwise theoretically
So
valid.
if I've got a whole series of list items, I can have each list item can have an anchor with the same name and a thing that anchors to that, and only the things inside of each list item. They'll sort of each work independently without unique IDs. That's what you're getting at.
Exactly. Yeah,
Got
because
it.
if there is multiple elements with the same anchor name on the page, that's perfectly valid. The anchor will default to selecting the last one that it is allowed to see. There's still that ordering constraint, things that come after it in painting order, it can't anchor to. But the first one of all the things that it is allowed to see, the last one of all the things it is allowed to see, it will go ahead and anchor to. This has some interesting use cases. If you go to the slide deck that I linked earlier, there's some fun stuff you can do with allowing multiple elements with the same anchor name. But yeah, if you have, say, a bunch of list items, a bunch of cards, a bunch of slides, whatever, that all want to use the same sort of styling, they all want to have their own anchor paused thing. Scope lets you do that without having to mint unique names for everything.
Yeah, definitely useful if you're making like a component library and want a repeatable drop-down menu or something like that. You don't have to worry about having a unique ID for each of the component instances.
One important bit too is you don't need to use anchor scope if the container that you're worried about here is your ABIS-Pose container. If it's a position relative or something, if it's the thing that's generating the containing block for your anchor, then you're already good. But if your anchor is position fixed, or if it's in the top layer, those escape those containing blocks. And so they get to see the whole page. And that's when you still need anchor scope, because that will properly limit what anchor names it's allowed to see, even though its containing block is way high up in the page.
Okay. Is there any performance or is it, I assume if, in this case where we are just looking, this position element is only looking to this within the scope for an anchor versus looking across the entire page, there might be some performance enhancement. Is that something that would actually be, or that should be considered, or is that?
I do not know if anybody's done any real tests for large DOMs to see if the anchor name search is detectable on traces or not. I expect it might be, but on the other hand, it might be cheap enough that we're just naive and kind of do the same amount of work and then filter at the end. I don't know. That'd be an interesting thing to test somewhere. In general, though, I expect that you'll run into other layout costs with enormous DOMs long before anchor name resolution becomes something you ever have to think about.
Okay.
Yeah, there's also a thing with that question always where it tends to improve quickly if browsers see an issue. So there will be an article at some point that says, don't do this, browsers are not performant with it. And then browsers will see that article and fix it. But the warning lasts for years, even though the issue has been fixed. So I always take those with a little bit of a grain of salt. There was a little thing there. I don't know, James, if you want to show it again. You didn't really talk through the code. I was just noticing that. So the way you set up the anchor scope, if you want to scroll that into the CSS there, so you're setting it on the thing that creates the boundary and only for specific names. So like if you had a scope of --b, I mean, if you had an anchor of --b, that would still be visible outside of the scope because you're only scoping specific things. Sorry, I have not played with this before, so I was noticing how it's working. You're putting it on the element that should, that the boundary it should not cross, and you're saying which names don't cross that boundary. Is there any sort of all value, or do you gotta list them each individually?
Let me make sure of the name. Yeah, the name all works. It defaults to none, no scoping. You can say all, scope all your names, or if you only want to scope particular names, you can list them.
Nice.
Yeah, you notice if you go back to the -B version, both of the inside and outside are positioning next to the anchor you would expect. That's actually somewhat accidental behavior. It's nice that it works that way. This is because the first anchor is visible to the inside scope pink box because it precedes it, but the second anchor is not because it's later past its containing block, I think. Meanwhile, both of them are visible to outside scope, so it takes the last one. And so a lot of times, even if you're not scoping, even if all the names are visible, sometimes things will still line up with the anchor that you expect just because those are it's the most recent thing that it is capable of seeing.
So that's not what we're seeing here, but that's because you changed the anchor, the position anchor to B also? If you change those back to A, you'll see what Tab was talking about.
No.
Yeah, there we go.
Right?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
So that's anchoring to A and only scoping B.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep. Oh.
Okay, I'll let you move on.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I'll note, and this is I think primarily in polyfill land, which is a little bit different than native in the browser, but one thing to check is make sure your styles are actually showing up in the DOM. What we've seen people doing is using inline styles, and things like React or Vue are using, I think they're using Houdini to set inline styles, and then that, of course, throws away any unknown styles. So we're seeing people like, why isn't this working? And we look in the DOM, and it's not, their position anchor or anchor names are not actually showing up. So just that's not about anchor positioning itself, but just something to check in, especially if you're working in a browser that doesn't yet support anchor positioning.
And that's something to do with the browser API for adding inline styles?
Yes.
Ignores things it doesn't understand, so they never get added?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If you set the attribute directly, it's fine. They'll all show up. But if you use style.setProperty or whatever, it'll reject things it doesn't know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah. It's definitely Sorry, go ahead.
It's kind of a core of a lot of simple feature testing libraries is you just try to set a property on an element using the proper CSS OM API, and then check and see if it actually got set or if you get the empty string back.
Okay, I'm going to have to use that.
I think so. Those are the demos that I had. I think I'd be curious to hear. There's especially around containing block. What are the ways that we can make this easier to understand or kind of explain it to people? My mental model has been the space in which a positioned element can be positioned cannot be smaller than the space in which the anchor can be positioned. But that kind of blurs a lot of lines and is not necessarily completely accurate. What is a good way of building a mental model around these rules?
That's a great question because there's enough corner cases and algorithm complexity there that we can't avoid. But any mental model that's not just what the spec says is going to fail in some cases. But generally speaking, and your containing block is just going to be the bounds of your nearest ancestor that is also rel pos or abs pos or fix pos. Unless you yourself are fix pos or top layer, in which case it's the full viewport. Some things can shrink your containing block. Like we said, grid area can shrink your containing block, position area can shrink it. And then of course your insets themselves can shrink or grow your containing block from there. But mostly it's just a matter of you got to walk up to find the first ancestor that'll create your containing block for you, and it's that element's bounds is the rule there. I wish that DevTools was a little bit more useful in showing you the bounds of it. Without that, the trick that we showed earlier with just having an inset 0 element using the same positioning styles, and a useful visible background works well for just showing where it might be. If you're confused because your element is just doing something bizarre, do that to see what exactly your containing block is, and it'll probably enlighten you as to what you need to actually do to get the position you want.
And then once you understand your containing block, is there any rule for how that has to relate to the anchoring element? You're anchoring to something. Does it have to be inside of that containing block?
It does not have to be. If the anchor is not inside the containing block, then position area is probably not going to do anything useful for you, because position area, like I said, it sets up a 3x3 grid with the outer bounds being your containing block and the inner lines being your anchor. So your anchor is right in the center cell of the 3x3. And if your anchor is outside the block, then you're just going to get like, this is just the left region or whatever. Not very useful. But all the other stuff, if you explicitly use the anchor functions to position yourself, it works just fine. It doesn't matter where it is. It's just like you can say left 150% to put your position element way outside of the containing block. It's literally the exact same thing, because the anchor function just resolves to a length that is relative to the containing block edge. So anchor doesn't need to be in the middle of it, but if it is inside of the containing block, then you get to use more features in a more useful way. That's it.
Yeah. That's really helpful. Yeah, and I agree. I've been trying to think through recently, like how could we incorporate this into dev tools around containing block and incorporating feedback on anchor positioning specifically. But yeah, I think that'd be interesting to, especially trying to figure out that right language around it's the element that generates the containing block, but not necessarily the containing block itself. Or yeah,
because we have, I don't know about other browsers, but I know that Chrome at least has like, if you have a grid element, you can see in the dev tools exactly where all your grid lines are. That's extremely useful. Having a similar bit of functionality that would let you just see where your containing block is if you're an apps pose seems great.
Yeah, could even be useful for anything that's absolute or fixed position. Show the containing block, and then with anchor position, it becomes even more useful.
Exactly.
So who do we request? Do we just tell you we want that?
No, I think the better thing is to bug some of our dev rows. They usually have the better inner connection to there. So bug Argyle, Inc. or whatever.
Great. Well, I think we're coming up at the end of our time. I'm curious if there are things that people are excited about with anchor positioning. It's included in Interop 2025, which means it's coming to, currently this is all Chromium, so coming up in Firefox, Safari, etc. And we're working on polyfill improvements, which of course, because it's in Interop, that means the polyfill will have has an end date of when it will be as useful, but which is great. But yeah, I'm curious, are there other things that either with polyfill or with anchor positioning or with other things that you're excited about?
Well, like I said, there's a few improvements that I'm hoping will be able to be put into anchor positioning either this year or sometime after. Well, first of all, just heck, having anchor positioning in the Interop 2025 project is great. That's just a wonderful driver for making sure that everybody does it in a timely manner. Remember, Interop's not a forcing function. We all have to agree to put something in there in the first place, but it's everybody putting their name on the dotted line that, yes, I promise to go implement this year, and it matches the specs, or at least matches the tests. So great news, means it'll be available much sooner than I would have expected otherwise, broadly. I'm particularly excited because I have a small but non-trivial bit of JavaScript in all the CSS specs that I wrote to do anchor positioning for some of the little like definition pop-ups. And I would love to rip all those out and replace them with 4 lines of CSS.
Yeah.
There's a question from YouTube about, can we speak a bit about overflowing anchors? Is there anything special about them? I would love to get a little bit more detail on that question. The anchor is overflowing what? I think no, go ahead.
Well, I'm curious because I know one of the things that comes up a lot is when you're in a scroll container and the anchor scrolls out of view. I wonder if it's about that. I mean, they can respond more, but can you say a little bit about that?
I can, because that's actually something useful too. This was not present in the first drafts of Anchor Pos. I think it's implemented in Chrome now, but if you tried it earlier, it didn't. Originally, if you had a scrollable element and your anchor was in the scroller and it was like scrolled out of view, it was still a valid anchor. And so your positioned element, so you could see that. If it was inside the scroller, that's fine, because it would just be hidden by the overflow. But if it was outside, it could still see the anchor and would go position itself at some random spot in the page where the anchor is relative to the element, which is stupid. It doesn't look right. It doesn't do anything correctly. There's a feature now, position visibility. Let's see, where is it? Yeah, position visibility. It's in the anchor position spec that has a few ways to make an anchor stop being valid for you. The important one here is anchors visible. That's the default value anyway. So if your anchor is not on the page, if it's outside the scrollable region or whatever, it's no longer a valid anchor for you. So that means that your anchor will, your positioned element will stop being visible if its anchor scrolls off. In fact, it doesn't even make it not a valid anchor. It makes the element hide itself if its anchors are gone. So it doesn't just like pop over to a default position on the page because it's no longer positioned.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as the anchor falls out of the scrollable window, the anchor pause element will by default go invisible. So you'll still have a little bit of potential weirdness, like as the anchor is partially going out, it's still anchored to it. So if it's anchored to the bottom edge, it'll be like a little bit outside of the container. But ultimately, there's a lot of wiggle room you could potentially do in that feature, and we just kept it simple. So once it's fully gone, it'll go invisible. That generally does what you want there. There's a few other bits on position visibility that be useful to do, but anchors visible is the big one. And luckily, that's the default value as well. So if you don't do anything special, it'll do the right thing for you.
And that's another part of it that we didn't get into, but there's also some rules around whether you can anchor onto something that is in a scroll container. Yeah, there's that I haven't done much digging into all those rules, but that's another.
Scroll container is nothing special there. It doesn't block or otherwise interact with the anchor visibility at all. So as long as you could see it when it wasn't a scroll container, you can see it if it is a scroll container. And that's why we needed to introduce those the position visibility property, because the moment you started interacting with that in a real world page, you're like, oh, this is wrong.
Yeah. Great. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. Tab, where can we find out more about you, or is there where you want to promote or let us know?
All right. Well, I'm on Blue Sky, tabatkins.com. Theoretically, I still have a Twitter account, but try my best to not actually look at that website anymore. But otherwise, if you want to contact me, do it on Blue Sky. I'm on like Discord and whatnot too, basically the same name. I'm Tab Atkins everywhere. I'm one of only 2 people in the world that have ever had this name, and the other one was my dad, and he's dead now. So I'm the only one. So I'm easy to find. Nothing otherwise to promote though, or whatever. I don't have any big projects or whatever. I'm just a work-a-day programmer. So everybody read your specs and call your elected representatives and complain about everything that's going on.
Great.
Yes.
Yes. Well, please visit oddbird.net oddbird.net/wingingit to access links and resources mentioned on today's show, or to send us feedback. You can also hire us. Oh, we can't see that now. I will show. There's a CTA. Or you can hire us to build custom web apps that make the web a better place. Join us next month for another episode of Winging It. And if you have topics you'd like us to cover, let us know. If you'd like to support us, please like and subscribe. And if you want more from Oddbird, we invite you to check out our newsletter at oddbird.net/oddnews. Thank you. And remember, best practice is a conversation. So let's keep talking. Thanks all.
Thank you.